Colonel Potter, sir, my last wish is to be buried in my mother's wedding gown.
I've seen these Dodgers for 40 years, all the tricks. Dismissed!
There is a moment in television history that stopped America cold. No dramatic music, no warning, no chance to prepare. Just a young soldier walking into a surgical tent, hat in hand, and delivering 4 sentences that changed everything. Audiences who had spent 3 seasons laughing with these characters suddenly found themselves grieving one. That is the kind of power MASH had over people. It was not just a show. It was a weekly ritual, a shared emotional experience, and for the actors who lived inside it, it was sometimes too much to carry. Because here is what most people never talk about. Behind one of the greatest television series ever made, there was a constant undercurrent of frustration, burnout, ambition, and heartbreak. Stars who seemed perfectly happy on screen were quietly falling apart off it. And one by one, some of the most beloved characters in TV history walked away. Some left chasing bigger dreams. Some left because they were exhausted. Some left because the show had simply outgrown them, or they had outgrown it. The real reasons are more human, more complicated, and far more interesting than most people realize. MASH premiered on CBS in September 1972, and from the very beginning, it was something different. Based on a 1968 novel by H. Richard Hornberger, writing under the pen name Richard Hooker, and then adapted into a celebrated 1970 film directed by Robert Altman, the television version took the bones of the story and built something richer around them. Set in a mobile army surgical hospital during the Korean War, the show used the distance of a past conflict to speak directly to the present trauma of Vietnam. Americans were watching their country tear itself apart over a war they did not understand. And here was a series that looked them in the eye and said, war is absurd, war is painful, and the only way through it is each other. The early seasons crackled with energy. Alan Alda's Hawkeye Pierce was irreverent and brilliant. The ensemble around him felt lived in and genuine. But television is a long game, and 11 seasons is a very long time to sustain anything, including a cast. The departures began early and continued throughout the run, each one leaving a different kind of mark on the show and on the people involved. McLean Stevenson was the first major cast member to go, and his exit remains one of the most discussed in television history, not because of how he left, but because of what the writers chose to do with his character afterward. Stevenson played Colonel Henry Blake, the commanding officer of the 4077th, a man who was bumbling and warm and fundamentally decent. He was not the sharpest officer in the army, but he was exactly the kind of leader you would want in a place like that, someone who understood that keeping his people sane was as important as keeping them alive. Stevenson earned a Golden Globe for the role and was genuinely beloved by audiences. But behind the scenes, he was growing restless. As Alan Alda became more deeply embedded in the creative fabric of the show, contributing to writing and directing in addition to performing, Hawkeye Pierce began to expand beyond the boundaries of a typical sitcom lead. He became the moral conscience of the series, the emotional center around which everything else orbited. And Stevenson, watching this happen in real time, felt himself being eclipsed. He was not wrong. The show was changing, and his character was not changing with it. What Stevenson wanted was to be the lead. Not a lead, the lead. He had watched the landscape of television carefully and believed he had the talent and the charisma to carry a show on his own shoulders. In his mind, staying in an ensemble where he was increasingly playing second or third fiddle was not a strategic use of his career. So at the end of the 3rd season, he told the producers he would not be coming back. What happened next was not what anyone expected. Instead of sending Henry Blake off with a gentle reassignment or quiet transfer, the writers made a decision that was audacious for 1975. They killed him. Not on screen, but in a single line of dialogue delivered by Gary Berghoff's Radar Riley in the final moments of the season finale. Henry Blake's plane had been shot down over the Sea of Japan. There were no survivors. The silence that followed in living rooms across America was unlike anything television had produced before. Viewers called CBS in outrage and in grief. Some were angry. Many were simply devastated. The show had made its point with brutal clarity. In war, people do not always get to go home. Stevenson, meanwhile, pursued the solo stardom he had left for. He signed with NBC and launched a family sitcom built around his likable persona. It was cancelled after 1 season. A second attempt did not fare much better. By the early 1980s, He was publicly acknowledging what many around him had already sensed, that MASH had been a once-in-a-lifetime thing, and he had walked away from it. He continued working in television until his death in 1996, but he never again found a role that connected with audiences the way Henry Blake had. His story is, at its core, a cautionary tale about the difference between what we want and what we already have. Wayne Rogers left under entirely different circumstances, and in some ways, his departure was even more abrupt. Rogers played trapper John McIntyre, Hawkeye's closest friend and partner in Chaos. The two of them together were magnetic. Their chemistry was fast and funny and completely natural, the kind of dynamic that makes television feel alive. Fans adored them as a unit. But Rogers had joined the show under a specific set of assumptions. He believed MASH would function as a true ensemble, with the core cast sharing screen time more or less equally. As the series evolved, that did not happen. The spotlight moved decisively toward Alder, and Rogers found himself in a supporting role within a show he had signed on to co-lead. His character, once a fully engaged participant in every storyline, was increasingly reduced to reacting to what Hawkeye was saying or doing. In one interview, Rogers described it plainly. Trapper had become the person who nodded along. What made Rogers' situation unusual was a contractual detail that gave him considerably more leverage than most actors in his position would have had. His agreement with the production had never been formally finalized. He had essentially been working on a gentleman's agreement, which meant that when he decided not to return for the fourth season, the producers had very little legal recourse. They threatened action. It went nowhere. Rogers simply did not come back. The writers had no farewell episode prepared, no storyline in place, no emotional send-off. The season 4 premiere had to explain Trapper's absence with a single throwaway line. He had been discharged while Hawkeye was on leave. Hawkeye arrived back at camp to find his best friend gone, replaced by a stranger named B.J. Honeycutt. Audiences were disoriented. They had already lost Henry Blake. Now Trapper was gone too, without even a goodbye. Mike Farrell stepped into the role of BJ with considerable skill, and the show adapted. In fact, many critics and longtime viewers argue that MASH matured significantly after Rogers' departure, that the shift from the freewheeling buddy comedy of the early seasons to something more emotionally layered and complex was ultimately what elevated the series into something genuinely great. Rogers himself, to his credit, never seemed to carry significant bitterness about any of it. He had studied history at Princeton and eventually built a highly successful second career as a financial investor and media commentator, becoming a regular presence on television as an economics analyst. He was, by most accounts, absolutely fine. When he passed away in 2015, Alan Alda remembered him with genuine warmth and affection. Gary Berghoff's departure is perhaps the most poignant of all, because unlike Stevenson or Rogers, Berghoff did not leave because he wanted something more. He left because he had nothing left to give. Berghoff was the only member of the television cast who had also appeared in the original 1970 film. He brought Radar Riley to the screen with a specificity and a gentleness that was entirely his own creation. The film version of the character had been more mischievous, even a little crude. Berghoff turned Radar into something else entirely, a symbol of innocence in a world that was doing its best to destroy innocence. The teddy bear, the oversized glasses, the way he could somehow hear the helicopters before anyone else. These details accumulated into one of the most deeply felt characters in television history. And Gary Berghoff carried that character for 7 seasons while quietly falling apart. The production schedule was grueling, and Berghoff was a perfectionist by nature, which made it worse. He struggled with anxiety and depression throughout his time on the show, conditions that were not well understood or openly discussed in that era. He was also a father with a young daughter at home, and the long hours on set meant he was missing the years he could never get back. He later spoke about the guilt of that absence with striking honesty, describing it as a mistake he never fully stopped regretting. There were also tensions with the producers over compensation and scheduling. Berghoff wanted more flexibility, fewer appearances per season, and better pay that reflected his central role in the show's emotional architecture. Accommodations were made, but they were not enough. By the 8th season, he had made his decision. Unlike Wayne Rogers, Berghoff was given a genuine farewell. The 2-part episode that sent Radar home is among the most emotionally resonant pieces of television MASH ever produced. His final image, walking away from the camp with his silhouette shrinking against the Korean sky, his teddy bear left behind on Hawkeye's bunk, communicates something that goes beyond the story of one character leaving one show. It feels like the end of something larger, a kind of innocence the series itself had been protecting. After MASH, Berghoff stepped away from Hollywood almost entirely. He devoted himself to painting, to wildlife conservation, and, in a detail that somehow perfectly fits the man who played Radar, to inventing. He held multiple patents. He chose a quiet life, and by all accounts, it suited him. Larry Linville's situation was different again. He played Major Frank Burns for 5 seasons, and he played him brilliantly. Frank was petty, insecure, hypocritical, and cowardly, a perfect comic villain who gave the heroes of the 4077 someone to push against. Audiences loved to hate him, and Linville understood exactly what he was doing. He was a trained, technically accomplished actor with considerably more range than Frank Burns ever required, and he channeled that range into making Frank's smallness feel completely, uncomfortably real. But by the end of the 5th season, Linville could see clearly that the character had no road left to travel. MASH was becoming more sophisticated in its storytelling, more interested in moral complexity and genuine character development. Frank Burns was built for a different version of the show, one that had already moved on. He was a one-note antagonist in a series that was learning to play full orchestral arrangements. Linville did not wait to be written out. He chose not to renew his contract, explaining that he had taken the character as far as he could go. It was a remarkably self-aware decision for an actor to make, and a generous one, because it gave the show the room it needed to grow. Frank was written out off-screen, having received a promotion and reassignment. His absence created a space that the writers filled with a completely different kind of character. David Ogden Stiers arrived as Major Charles Emerson Winchester III in the 6th season, and where Frank had been a buffoon, Winchester was a formidable antagonist, cultured and brilliant and deeply proud, someone whose prejudices came wrapped in genuine competence rather than mere pettiness. The dynamic shifted entirely, and the show was better for it. Linville went on to do guest roles in various productions, but never again found a part that matched the cultural visibility of Frank Burns. He passed away in 2000, remembered by fans with far more affection than Frank Burns ever managed to inspire. David Ogden Stiers is worth discussing in his own right, not because he left in conflict or controversy, but because his eventual exit from MASH was one of the most graceful departures the show ever staged. He stayed through the series finale, and his final scene, quietly teaching Chinese prisoners of war to play Mozart on borrowed instruments, is one of the most quietly devastating moments in the entire run. It encapsulates everything Winchester had come to represent, that war reaches inside every person and rearranges something, regardless of how much armor they have built around themselves. After MASH, Stiers worked extensively in voice acting and continued to take on television and film roles. He was a deeply private man for most of his public life, and it was not until 2009, when he was in his mid-60s, that he publicly came out as gay. He spoke openly about the fact that he had kept that part of himself private for decades out of genuine professional concern, particularly during years when he was doing voice work for family entertainment. The fear of typecasting, of losing work, of being seen differently, had been real and had shaped choices he made across a long career. He died in 2018 at the age of 75, remembered for both his extraordinary range as a performer and the quiet dignity with which he eventually chose to live on his own terms. And then there is Loretta Swit, who stayed for all 11 seasons, which is its own kind of remarkable story. Swit played Major Margaret Houlihan, a character who began the series as a punchline and ended it as one of the most fully realized women on American television. The nickname the show gave Margaret in its early seasons reflected exactly how the writers initially conceived her, as a joke. Swit refused to accept that framing. Season after season, she pushed for more depth, more complexity, more humanity. She got it, and so did Margaret. By the finale, the character had evolved from a rigid rule follower who existed to be mocked into a skilled officer, a compassionate nurse, and a woman whose contradictions made her genuinely interesting. In a cast defined by departures, Swit's loyalty to the show and to her character stands out. She was one of only 4 actors to appear in both the pilot and the final episode. That kind of commitment, sustained across more than a decade of early mornings and emotionally demanding material, is its own form of courage. MASH ran for 11 seasons and ended in 1983 with a finale that drew over 100 million viewers in the United States, a number that has never been matched. The people who made it, the ones who stayed and the ones who left, were all shaped by it in ways that lasted the rest of their lives. The departures were not failures. They were human beings making human decisions under the particular pressures of a singular creative experience. Some of those decisions they later regretted. Some they did not. But each exit changed the show, and each change revealed something new about what MASH was actually capable of.